In the heart of downtown Chicago, where skyscrapers pierced the sky and people rushed through crowded streets, there was a corporate office that buzzed with activity during the day. But when evening fell and the last employee left for home, the Reese building transformed into something quieter, dimmer, and almost magical in its solitude. This was Margaret's world, a place she had grown to know intimately over the years. Margaret was not like the other employees who filled the offices by day. She didn't wear sharp suits or carry sleek laptops. Instead, her uniform consisted of a faded blue jumpsuit, slightly too big for her petite frame, paired with sturdy sneakers that made soft squeaking sounds as she moved across the polished floors. Her cart, loaded with cleaning supplies, rattled gently behind her as she worked her way through the maze of cubicles and meeting rooms. To most people, Margaret was invisible, a background character in their busy lives. Some barely noticed her at all, while others only saw her as the elderly janitor who cleaned up after them. But Margaret wasn't just any ordinary janitor. Beneath her quiet demeanor lay a lifetime of experiences, adventures, and secrets that no one could have guessed. At 72 years old, she carried stories from every corner of the globe within her. Yet here she was, mopping floors and emptying trash bins in a city that never seemed to slow down. Life had taken her on a winding path, full of unexpected turns, but it had ultimately led her to this humble job out of necessity rather than choice. During the day, Margaret lived a solitary life. She rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, far away from the noise and chaos of downtown. Her walls were adorned with photographs of places she'd visited, ancient temples in Kyoto, bustling markets in Marrakech, serene beaches in Bali. Each picture told a story of a different chapter in her life, a reminder of the adventures she once cherished. But now those memories felt distant, like echoes of another time. Margaret rarely spoke about her past, even to herself. It was easier to keep those days locked away, hidden behind the monotony of her nightly routine. At work, Margaret kept to herself, avoiding eye contact and steering clear of conversations. Over the years, she had learned that staying unnoticed was often the safest route. Still, some people couldn't resist making comments. A few younger employees would snicker as they passed her in the hallway, mocking her outdated uniform or the way she shuffled slowly between tasks. "Look at Grandma," one might whisper, loud enough for her to hear. Another would chime in, "What's she even doing here? Shouldn't she be retired?" These remarks stung, though Margaret never let it show. She simply smiled faintly to herself and continued working, knowing better than to engage. One particular evening, however, something unusual happened. Margaret was tidying up near the large glass-walled conference room when she overheard voices inside. Two interns, bright-eyed and eager to impress, were practicing phrases in French for an upcoming presentation. They stumbled awkwardly over the pronunciation, laughing nervously whenever they made mistakes. Margaret paused outside the door, listening intently. Without thinking, she softly corrected one of their mispronunciations from where she stood in the hallway. The sudden sound startled the interns, who turned toward the source of the voice. There was Margaret, mop in hand, looking back at them with a gentle smile. "Excuse me?" one of them asked, clearly confused. Margaret hesitated for a moment before repeating the phrase flawlessly, adding a brief explanation of its meaning. The interns exchanged bewildered glances, unsure what to make of this strange encounter. One of them finally mustered the courage to ask, "Do you speak French?" Margaret nodded, still smiling. "Yes," she replied simply, before returning to her task. The interns watched her walk away, dumbfounded. That night, they couldn't stop talking about the mysterious janitor who spoke perfect French. Their curiosity only grew as they realized this might not be the end of Margaret's story. It could very well be the beginning of something extraordinary. As Margaret pushed her cart down the deserted hallway, she couldn't help but chuckle, softly to herself. For the first time in years, someone had noticed her, not as a faceless janitor, but as someone with knowledge worth sharing. Little did she know, this small interaction would set off a chain of events that would change her life forever. The next evening, the office buzzed with whispers. News of Margaret's unexpected talent had spread like wildfire among the younger employees. By now, everyone seemed to know about the elderly Jankeeper who spoke flawless French. Some dismissed it as a fluke, a lucky guess perhaps, but others were genuinely curious. How could someone in her position, working such a modest job, possess such a skill? It didn't make sense to them, and that mystery only fueled their intrigue. A small group of interns decided to investigate further. They waited until Margaret began her nightly rounds, then cautiously approached her near the break room. At first, they felt awkward, unsure how to broach the subject without seeming rude. One of them finally cleared his throat and said, "Hi, Margaret. We were wondering, do you really speak French?" Margaret stopped what she was doing and turned to face them. She studied their faces for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a faint smile, she replied, "Yes, I do." Her voice was calm but firm, carrying an air of quiet confidence that made the interns exchange nervous glances. Emboldened by her response, another intern asked, "Can you say something in French, just to prove it?" Without hesitation, Margaret launched into a short, eloquent sentence in perfect Parisian French. The interns stared at her, wide-eyed. One of them tried to repeat it, stumbling over the pronunciation, while another pulled out their phone to check if she was accurate. Sure enough, every word was spot on, but just as they thought they'd seen the extent of her ability, one of them jokingly blurted out, "Okay, but can you speak Spanish too?" To their astonishment, Margaret switched effortlessly into Spanish, greeting them warmly and asking how their day had been. The interns erupted into laughter and applause, completely taken aback by her fluency. Encouraged by their enthusiasm, they began testing her with random phrases in other languages, German, Italian, even Mandarin. Each time, Margaret responded without missing a beat, her accent impeccable and her grammar flawless. It was as though she carried a library of languages inside her head, ready to pull out whichever one was needed. As the night wore on, the group grew bolder in their questions. "How many languages do you actually speak?" one of them asked, half expecting her to name a number like 5 or 6. Margaret tilted her head thoughtfully before answering, 17. The room fell silent. 17 languages. It sounded impossible, yet here she was, proving it right in front of them. The interns gawked at her, their jaws practically hitting the floor. One of them stammered, "That's insane, like superhuman insane." Curiosity turned to admiration as they peppered her with more questions. How did she learn so many languages? Where had she traveled? Had she always been this talented? For the first time in years, Margaret found herself opening up about her past. She spoke softly, almost wistfully, as she recounted tales of her younger days. She told them about growing up in a household where multiple languages were spoken, sparking her love for linguistics early on. She described her travels across continents, immersing herself in different cultures and picking up new languages along the way. There were stories of teaching at universities, translating for international organizations, and even working as a guide for diplomats during high-stakes negotiations. Her listeners hung on to every word, mesmerized by the vividness of her descriptions. They imagined her walking through bustling markets in Morocco, bargaining in Arabic, sitting in quiet tea houses in Japan, conversing in Japanese, or navigating snowy streets in Russia, chatting with locals in Russian. To them, Margaret wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a living embodiment of adventure and wisdom. But not everyone reacted with awe. As word of Margaret's abilities continued to spread, some employees remained skeptical. A few openly mocked her, dismissing her skills as irrelevant. "What's the point of speaking 17 languages if all you're doing is mopping floors?" One snickered during lunch. Another chimed in, "Yeah, good luck using Swahili to clean toilets." These comments reached Margaret eventually, delivered secondhand by sympathetic co-workers who warned her to ignore them. And for the most part, she did. She had faced worse insults in her life and knew better than to let negativity weigh her down. Still, there were moments when the mocking cut deeper than she cared to admit. Late at night, After the building had emptied and the hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, she would pause mid-task and reflect on how drastically her life had changed. Once, she had been respected, sought after for her expertise. Now, she spent her nights scrubbing coffee stains off tables and emptying trash bins. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Margaret reminded herself why she was here: necessity. Life had thrown challenges her way, health issues, financial struggles, and taking this job had been the only option. Pride wouldn't pay the bills. Despite the occasional ridicule, Margaret's newfound fame brought unexpected benefits. More and more employees started approaching her, eager to learn from her vast knowledge. Some asked for help with language lessons, hoping to impress clients or prepare for trips abroad. Others simply wanted to hear her stories, captivated by the richness of her experiences. Margaret welcomed these interactions, finding joy in sharing her passion with others. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of purpose returning to her life. One evening, a young marketing associate named Clara approached Margaret with a request. "I'm giving a presentation next week to a German client," Clara explained, "and I want to start with a greeting in their language. Can you teach me?" Margaret nodded and patiently guided Clara through the pronunciation, correcting her gently whenever she stumbled. By the end of the session, Clara beamed with gratitude. "You're amazing," she said sincerely. "Thank you so much." Moments like these reminded Margaret that her talent still mattered, even in this unassuming role. She might not be standing in front of a classroom or negotiating treaties anymore, but she was making a difference in her own quiet way. And though she never sought recognition, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest whenever someone acknowledged her skills. Little did Margaret know, however, that her journey was far from over. While she continued her nightly duties, oblivious to the ripples she had created, higher-ups in the company were beginning to take notice. Word of the multilingual janitor had reached ears that held power, and soon, everything would change in ways she could never have anticipated. It was a rare occasion when the CEO of the company, James Carter, stayed late in the office. Known for his relentless work ethic and sharp decision-making, James was usually the first to arrive and among the last to leave. But tonight, he found himself buried under a mountain of documents, preparing for an important overseas deal with a Japanese tech firm. The pressure was mounting, and despite his usual calm demeanor, James couldn't shake off the frustration simmering beneath the surface. The contract sitting on his desk was dense, filled with technical jargon and legal terms written in both English and Japanese. James prided himself on being a global leader who understood the importance of cross-cultural communication, but even he had his limits. His grasp of Japanese was functional at best, enough to navigate casual conversations or order sushi, but deciphering complex business language was another matter entirely. As he flipped through the pages, one particular clause caught his attention. Something about it didn't sit right, but no matter how many times he read it, he couldn't pinpoint the issue. Just as he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, in exasperation he heard faint footsteps outside his door. At first he thought nothing of it, perhaps another executive burning the midnight oil. But then a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, expecting to see a familiar face. Instead, Margaret appeared in the doorway, pushing her cleaning cart. She froze for a moment, clearly surprised to find someone still working at this hour. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't realize anyone was here. I'll come back later." James waved her inside. "No, it's fine. Please, come in." He gestured toward the cluttered desk. "Actually, maybe you can help me with something. Do you speak Japanese?" Margaret hesitated, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "A little." James chuckled nervously. "Well, I could use all the help I can get. Take a look at this." He slid the document across the desk, pointing to the troublesome clause. Margaret stepped closer, adjusting her glasses as she studied the text. For a few seconds, there was silence as she carefully read through the lines. Then, without warning, she spoke. "This translation is incorrect," she said matter-of-factly. James blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" he asked, leaning forward. Margaret pointed to a specific phrase. "Here. This word doesn't mean exclusive rights. It means shared privileges. It changes the entire meaning of the agreement." Her explanation was concise yet precise, leaving no room for doubt. James stared at her, stunned. How could someone who cleaned the office floors know more about Japanese business contracts than he did? Curiosity quickly overshadowed his shock. How do you know this?" he asked, his tone tinged with awe. Margaret shrugged modestly. "I used to translate documents like these for international organizations, and I've lived in Japan for several years, so I understand the nuances of the language." James wasn't satisfied with just that answer. He peppered her with questions, testing her knowledge not only in Japanese but in other languages as well. To his amazement, Margaret responded flawlessly each time, switching between formal business terminology and colloquial expressions with ease. Whether it was explaining cultural subtleties in negotiation tactics or offering insights into idiomatic phrases, she demonstrated a level of expertise that left James speechless. As the conversation deepened, James realized he was speaking to someone extraordinary. Here was a woman who had traveled the world, mastered 17 languages, and worked alongside diplomats and scholars. Yet she was standing before him in a faded janitor's uniform, mopping floors for a living. The contrast was staggering, and it made him question everything he thought he knew about talent and opportunity. "Why are you here?" James finally asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "With your skills, you should be running departments, advising executives, not cleaning offices." Margaret sighed, her expression softening. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," she said simply. "I never planned to end up here, but sometimes circumstances force you to adapt. This job pays the bills, and that's enough for me." Her humility struck a chord with James. He had built his career on identifying potential and nurturing talent, yet he had failed to notice the incredible resource right under his nose. It was a humbling realization, one that sparked an idea in his mind. "Margaret," he began, his tone serious now, "would you be willing to sit down and talk more about your background, your experiences, and what you'd like to do next?" She looked at him quizzically, unsure where this was heading. "Of course, God," she replied, though her voice carried a hint of caution. Over the next hour, James listened intently as Margaret shared snippets of her life story. She spoke of teaching linguistics at universities, interpreting for high-profile meetings, and traveling to remote corners of the globe. Each anecdote painted a picture of a woman whose abilities were vast and varied, far exceeding the confines of her current role. By the time she finished, James felt inspired and determined. "You've been overlooked for far too long," he said firmly, "and I intend to fix that." Margaret smiled faintly, touched by his sincerity but skeptical of what it might mean. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I don't expect anything to change. I'm content with my life as it is." James shook his head. "Contentment is important, but so is recognizing greatness when we see it. You have a gift, Margaret, one that deserves to be shared with the world. Let me show you what I mean." With that, he escorted her out of his office, promising to follow up soon. As Margaret returned to her nightly duties, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to take another unexpected turn. Meanwhile, James retreated to his desk, already brainstorming ways to bring her talents to the forefront of the company. What started as a chance encounter was shaping up to become something transformative, for Margaret, for the company, and for everyone involved. The following morning, the atmosphere in the executive boardroom was tense. James Carter called an impromptu meeting with his leadership team, a group of high-powered executives who were accustomed to making decisions that shaped the company's future. As they filed into the room, some exchanged curious glances, wondering what could possibly warrant such an urgent gathering. James stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable but commanding. When everyone had settled, he began speaking without preamble. "I want to introduce you all to someone. James said, his voice steady and confident. He pressed a button on the remote in his hand, and a projector screen flickered to life behind him. The image displayed was a candid photo of Margaret, taken during one of her nightly cleaning rounds. Her face was calm, her eyes kind, and though she wore her usual uniform, there was an undeniable dignity about her. Some executives recognized her immediately, while others leaned forward, confused. "This is Margaret," James continued. "She works as a janitor here, cleaning our offices after hours. But what many of you don't know, and what I only discovered last night, is that Margaret speaks 17 languages fluently. She corrected a critical mistranslation in a contract we're negotiating with a Japanese tech firm. Not only that, she provided cultural insights that none of us, including myself, had considered." The room erupted into murmurs. A few executives exchanged skeptical looks, while others seemed genuinely intrigued. One senior manager raised his hand hesitantly. "That's impressive," he admitted, "but how does it apply to her role here? We already have translators and interpreters on retainer for international deals." James nodded, anticipating the question. "You're right, we do have resources. But Margaret isn't just a translator. She's a linguist, a cultural expert, and someone with decades of experience navigating global markets. Her knowledge goes beyond words. It encompasses context, nuance, and strategy. Last night, she explained things about Japanese business etiquette that would have saved us months of miscommunication if we'd known earlier." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "So, here's my proposal. I'm promoting Margaret to the position of Chief Linguistic Advisor. She'll oversee all international communications, ensure accurate translations, and provide strategic guidance for cross-cultural negotiations. This isn't just about rewarding her talent. It's about recognizing that true value can come from anywhere, regardless of title or background." The announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Some executives applauded, impressed by James's bold move. Others frowned, whispering objections under their breath. One particularly vocal opponent, a middle-aged man named Richard, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "With all due respect, James, this feels like a publicity stunt. Are we really going to put someone with no formal corporate training in such a high-level position? What message does that send to the rest of the team?" James met Richard's gaze squarely. "It sends a message that we value skill and expertise over titles and appearances. If we can't recognize greatness when it's right under our noses, then we're failing as leaders. Margaret has proven herself capable, more than capable, and I trust her to excel in this role." The debate continued for nearly an hour, with opinions divided. Eventually, however, James's unwavering conviction won out. By the end of the meeting, the decision was unanimous. Margaret would join the leadership team as Chief Linguistic Advisor, effective immediately. When James broke the news to Margaret later that day, she was overwhelmed. Standing in his office, clutching the mop she'd been using just moments ago, she struggled to process what he was saying. "You want me to—" "What?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I want you to take on a new role," James repeated patiently. "Your job will be to ensure that every international deal we make is culturally sensitive, accurately translated, and strategically sound. You'll report directly to me and work closely with our global teams. Does that sound like something you'd be interested in?" Margaret hesitated, torn between excitement and doubt. On one hand, this was an opportunity she never dreamed possible, a chance to use her skills in a meaningful way again. On the other hand, stepping into such a prestigious position felt daunting, especially given her current circumstances. "I appreciate the offer," she said slowly. "But are you sure I'm the right person for this? I haven't worked in a corporate setting in years." James smiled warmly. "Margaret, you've spent your life mastering languages and understanding cultures. That's exactly what we need. As for the corporate side of things, we'll support you every step of the way. Think of this as your next adventure." Her heart swelled at his words. Adventure? That was something she hadn't allowed herself to think about in a long time. After a moment's pause, she nodded. "All right," she said softly. "I'll do it." Margaret's transition wasn't without challenges. On her first day in the new role, she walked into a conference room filled with executives dressed in tailored suits, feeling painfully out of place in her simple blouse and slacks. The weight of their stares made her self-conscious, but she reminded herself of James's faith in her abilities. When she began speaking, explaining the intricacies of a Chinese contract negotiation, the room fell silent. By the end of the meeting, even the skeptics were nodding in approval. Over time, Margaret proved herself invaluable. She resolved misunderstandings in existing contracts, flagged potential cultural faux pas in marketing campaigns, and helped secure lucrative deals with foreign partners. Her presence transformed meetings, adding depth and insight that no one else could provide. Employees who had once mocked her now approached her with respect, eager to learn from her wisdom. One memorable moment came during a video call with a German client. Tensions were running high due to a miscommunication about delivery timelines. Just as the discussion threatened to derail, Margaret interjected, switching seamlessly into fluent German. Her calm demeanor and precise explanations diffused the situation, earning praise from both sides. Afterward, the lead negotiator turned to her and said, "We should have hired you years ago." Despite her success, Margaret remained humble. She credited her achievements to teamwork and often encouraged younger employees to embrace lifelong learning. "Languages are just tools," she told them during a company-wide presentation. "The real magic happens when you connect with people, across cultures. Never stop exploring because the world has so much to teach you." As months passed, Margaret's influence extended beyond the office walls. She became a symbol of resilience and hidden potential, inspiring workshops and mentorship, programs aimed at uncovering untapped talent within overlooked communities. Her journey also prompted the company to implement policies encouraging diversity and inclusivity, ensuring that everyone, from entry-level workers to senior management, had opportunities to shine. Though Margaret eventually retired, she left behind a legacy that reshaped the organization's culture. Employees remembered her not just as the janitor who spoke 17 languages, but as a reminder that greatness often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to listen. Years passed, and Margaret's name became synonymous with transformation, not just within the company but in the broader community as well. Her story inspired countless individuals, proving that talent and potential could be found in the most unexpected places if one only took the time to look. The ripple effects of her promotion extended far beyond boardroom negotiations and international deals. They reached into the lives of people who had long felt overlooked or undervalued, offering them hope and a renewed sense of purpose. One of the first changes Margaret championed was the creation of an internal mentorship program called Hidden Gems. Designed to identify and nurture untapped talent among employees, the initiative encouraged managers to recognize skills and passions that might otherwise go unnoticed. For example, a receptionist with a knack for graphic design was given the opportunity to work on marketing materials. A warehouse worker with a passion for engineering was enrolled in training courses to transition into product development. These small shifts not only boosted morale but also improved productivity across departments, reminding everyone that every role, no matter how seemingly insignificant, contributed to the company's success. Margaret herself played an active role in mentoring participants, sharing stories from her own life and offering practical advice on embracing opportunities. She often reminded them, "Your worth isn't defined by your job title. It's defined by what you bring to the table and how you choose to use it." Her words resonated deeply, especially with those who had faced discrimination or self-doubt because of their age, background, or circumstances. Outside the office, Margaret's influence grew even larger. Local schools invited her to speak at career days, where she captivated students with tales of her adventures and encouraged them to pursue their dreams fearlessly. Nonprofit organizations sought her guidance in creating programs to support underrepresented groups in professional settings. One such initiative focused on teaching language skills to immigrants, helping them integrate into society while showcasing their unique cultural perspectives. Margaret volunteered her time generously, believing that empowering others was the greatest legacy she could leave behind. Her retirement came quietly, almost unnoticed by those outside the company. Margaret didn't announce it with fanfare. Instead, she submitted her resignation letter with a simple note, thanking James and the team for allowing her to contribute in ways she never imagined possible. On her final day, the entire office gathered to celebrate her achievements. Speeches were made, gifts were exchanged, and tears were shed as colleagues expressed their gratitude for all she had done. Even Richard, the once skeptical executive, admitted, "Margaret, you changed us for the better." Though she stepped away from the corporate world, Margaret remained active in her community. She spent her days volunteering at libraries, leading language workshops, and writing articles about the importance of inclusivity in workplaces. Her book, Voices Unheard, Finding Worth Beyond Expectations, became a bestseller, inspiring readers around the globe to challenge stereotypes and seek out hidden talents in themselves and others. Back at the company, Margaret's legacy lived on in tangible ways. The framed photograph of her still hung prominently in the lobby, accompanied by a plaque that read, "Greatness knows no title." Let Margaret's journey remind us to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. New employees were introduced to her story during orientation, ensuring that future generations would carry forward the values she embodied: humility, resilience, and a belief in the boundless potential of human beings. Decades later, when a young intern named Sarah joined the company, she noticed the photo immediately. Curious, she asked her manager about it. He smiled and began recounting Margaret's remarkable journey, from janitor to chief linguistic advisor, from invisibility to inspiration. By the time he finished, Sarah's eyes sparkled with admiration. "She must have been amazing," she said softly. "She was," her manager replied. "But more importantly, she taught us that everyone has something valuable to offer, if we're willing to listen." And so Margaret's story continued to inspire, generation after generation. Though she was no longer physically present, her spirit lingered in every corner of the company and beyond. She had shown the world that greatness wasn't confined to titles, wealth, or status. It resided in the hearts of those who dared to dream, adapt, and persevere, and in the eyes of those wise enough to recognize it when they saw it. In the end, Margaret's life was a testament to the power of seeing people for who they truly are, rather than what they appear to be. Her journey reminded everyone that behind every quiet smile, every humble demeanor, there may lie a treasure trove of knowledge, experience, and untapped potential. And sometimes all it takes is one person willing to notice and believe, to change everything.